Hello, and welcome to another episode of Schlock Tactics, the movie podcast where we believe badder is better and aim to review the woeful Wells adaptations so that you don't have to. My name is Ash, and I'm joined once again by Mark. Oh, hi, Mark.
Hello.
So today, as you can tell by the title here, we are going to review, hot on the heels of World Book Day from last week, we're going to review two adaptations from one of my favourite writers, one of the best writers in history, H.G Wells, the godfather of science fiction. And they're two films that were adapted from his famous books, The Island of Dr Moreau from 1996 and The Time Machine from 2002. Before we get into that, just want to mention the last episode we did. It was our Razzie Awards special show. We reviewed all 5 of the Worst Picture nominees and made some bold predictions, which for the most part came true. Holmes and Watson, for the most part, did win almost all of the Razzies. John Travolta somehow didn't get any Razzies. I think there's something going on there, maybe some Scientologists on the board, maybe. But I was quite surprised by that. But we got some good feedback from a lot of people who had seen those films since they only came out last year. And most people tended to agree that Holmes and Watson was just cruel and unusual punishment to make anybody watch.
It was terrible.
So if you want to go back and check that show out, if you missed any of those films, you want to know what they were like, or if you saw those films and want to know what we think of them, go back and check it out. It's still available. But today, like I say, we are going to be covering adaptations of the great H.G Wells. First of all, we are going to be talking about a very notorious, very infamous bad movie, The Island of Dr Moreau from 1996, directed by Richard Stanley for 3 days before he was fired, and directed, therefore, from that point by John Frankenheimer. But we'll get into the behind-the-scenes stuff a bit later, because they can and they have made an entire documentary about the making of this film and all the troubles. Starring Marlon Brando in the title role, Val Kilmer, Fairuza Balk, Ron Perlman, if you were able to spot him in heavy goat makeup, and
David Thewlis.
David Thewlis as well as the sort of protagonist. So, yeah, this is one of the early novels that H.G Wells wrote towards the end of the 19th century. It's been adapted a couple of times, always poorly, pretty much. They did one in the 30s, which is sort of a black and white one called The Island of Lost Souls, which is all right. They did one in the 70s. That was also pretty poor. The third major adaptation of The Island of Dr Moreau. What were your first impressions of this, Mark? I wonder, did you know the premise of The Island of Dr Moreau before you watched this? Vaguely?
I knew of the story. I don't think I've actually read any Wells.
Were you massively surprised to see these sort of beast people then, or were you were expecting that somewhat?
I mean, I'd read the summary of the film, so maybe I spoiled it for myself.
I'd love to think there are people that are watching this not knowing, because I first saw this when I was maybe 11 and I haven't read any H.G Wells, and I was like, holy shit, there's like a beast man and then a monkey man and all sorts. So it was a surprise to me the first time I saw this.
Yeah.
And I think probably a bit of a surprise when you see what they look like.
It was kind of like surprising. It goes into the room with all the cages and there's like a kind of operation going on.
Yeah.
That was
that's quite a jarring
whoa,
scene. Yeah. And they do try and shock you with the appearance of the characters. So, but you knew a little bit of what to expect then from the premise. And you'd seen Marlon Brando performances before, I imagine.
Yeah.
Not quite.
I almost didn't recognise him.
Same level as this. Yeah.
It looked quite different.
Yeah, I mean, it has to be said, most of the people involved in this film were involved purely so they could work with Marlon Brando, and that turned out to be a bit of a letdown for them. But certainly Val Kilmer and Ron Perlman only agreed to do this film because of the opportunity to work with Marlon Brando in one of his last sort of films that he would do.
Why did Brando agree to do this film?
That I don't know. Money, and I don't know. I think he may have been a fan of H.G Wells as well. But yeah, The Island of Dr Moreau is set in the modern day, obviously, rather than the late 19th century with all modern times, modern characters. The opening credits set over a bit of a sort of mad science montage with loads of like microscopic cells like going mad in the background, plants sort of time lapse growing, the usual sort of stuff. We open on the Java Sea with David Thewlis, who's playing the protagonist here, who in this is called Edward Douglas. In the book, it's called Edward Prendick. I don't know why they changed it, but he straight away you see he's a survivor of a shipwreck. Him and two of his fellow shipmates, and straight into it they start having a bit of a knife fight in a dinghy, which is always a bad idea. I think if you've seen anything, you know that. And he's just too knackered to even intervene, so he just watches them fight each other over the side, and they sink. And there he's the sole survivor of the shipwreck. Drifts for a while until he's picked up by like a clipper. Has all these sort of vague dream sequences where people are looking at him, like weird shaped people are looking at him. And then he wakes up to meet Montgomery, who is played by Val Kilmer. Clearly in no state to perform most of the film, I would say. He explains that he's sort of going along to this island, and he asks him if he's a doctor because he's sort of giving him injections and stuff, and he says, "No, I'm more of a vet." So you start to get the idea of where we're going here. Yeah. But Douglas ends up getting off at the island, and again, there's reference to the others will come and pick up the cargo. Douglas is like, was that the islanders? Is that like the savages? He's like, yeah, sort of, the others. They deliver a pallet of bunnies to a cage, and Montgomery sort of holds up a rabbit in front of Douglas, so Douglas gives it a little kiss, and then Montgomery breaks its neck.
Yeah.
And Douglas is like, no, what did you do that for? Start to get some like quite cool POV shots from the bushes of like heavy breathing people, sort of introducing the locals. Douglas is brought to the main house of Dr. Moreau, who's still nowhere to be seen. And we're introduced to the Aissa character, who's played by Feruza Balk, who listeners will know from maybe Return to Oz, but also The Craft, that came out exactly the same year as Island of Dr Moreau, which is quite a cult hit. And then later in The Waterboy as Bobby Boucher's girlfriend. Yeah. She is sort of doing a bit of new age belly dancing and starts flirting with Douglas over his hands, starts like sniffing his hands, like quite animalistically. And then Val Kilmer just sort of steamrolls over these subtleties and goes, "Yeah, she's a pussycat," sort of ruining any subtlety. For the most part, Val Kilmer did not read the lines that were written for him, so most of what he's saying is his own feeling.
Oh, that doesn't surprise me too much.
Most of what he's saying is off the top of his head and what he thinks would be good to be in the script. He didn't look at the script, nor did Brando. I just wrote, Kilmer looks high as fuck in every scene, because he does. He's like mostly got his shirt off and wearing a sarong and looks like he's stoned off his tits for the whole film, and I don't doubt that's what the case was.
It's weird, like being on this kind of jungle island where everyone seems stoned, and like, you just think about like Marlon Brando in Apocalypse Now, where they're in the jungle and everyone's getting high.
Yeah,
pretty much.
We're not too far removed from that performance. They lock Douglas into his room, but he escapes super easily to the point where I don't know why they even bothered. As you mentioned earlier there, he makes his way into a sort of a laboratory where there's a caged animals, and then he sort of interrupts some surgeons who are looking after some sort of multi-titted creature with like a horse face and like 8 tits or 6 tits, whatever, like just going.
Yeah, you say looking after. I mean, it's screaming and writhing around,
but it's giving birth.
Yeah,
it is giving birth to
that's true.
A weird lumpy child as well. And then the surgeons all take down their masks, and they're all like the wolf boys of Mexico. Yeah. They're all like hairy faced, and you're like, whoa. Aissa helps Douglas escape, and then they come across one of the first proper beast people, the leopard man, who is just this guy that's like leaning over a stream, like sucking up the water. And you get a first glimpse of the like really awesome like practical effects in this film that were done by Stan Winston, who is like a practical effects legend. Even though it is just a man in like a onesie for the most part, they put real effort into like the hair and like the face, and they've also got like cat eyes and stuff like that. So I thought the leopard man looked pretty cool. And then almost immediately after, you're introduced to the ape man, who's like a baboon man. I think he's called Shasimun or something like that. It's quite memorable in the book. He calls himself a five-finger man. So he relates to Douglas because he's also got 5 fingers and none of the other animals have.
Yeah.
get a look at this pretty amazing set, I would say, as well. It's a sort of shanty town where the animal people live. It's all made up of like crashed planes and salvage from planes that have crashed on the island. I thought it was a pretty impressive set. I think it's a pretty expensive film. Both of these films were, but this looked quite expensive for the time. They were actually only meant to shoot for 6 weeks, and they ended up shooting for 6 months.
Oh wow!
For various reasons. So it was definitely an expensive film for one way or another. Introduced to the Sayer of the Law, which is this massive like goat man who's blind, and he's like a vicar, and he's played by Ron Perlman in heavy makeup. As I said, just wanted to work with Marlon Brando. Don't think he has a scene with him at all in the film. And then we are 30 minutes into the film. Enters Marlon Brando looking ridiculous as Dr. Moreau. This is all his own idea. The way he was he was dressed like some sort of pope with like white face and a lampshade on his head. This is all him. There was no costuming department here. This is him deciding how he was going to play this character. Brought in on a sort of it looks like a Pope-mobile. It's like a Jeep, but it's like a Pope-mobile. And he's got all this weird shit on his face, which he explains later is because he can't stand the heat and the sun, so that's why he looks like a sort of geisha girl. Yeah, just looks ridiculous, and you start to get his dialogue in this film, which is incomprehensible, 90% incomprehensible. Yeah, the people do like jokey impressions of him in The Godfather, but this is even worse. Doing some sort of like half-assed English accent, maybe, but mostly just hasn't got his teeth in, and it's just what?
You need subtitles for this film.
Yeah, definitely. Marlon Brando famously never learned his lines, and for this film, as with other films at the time, he wore a tiny radio transmitter in his ear where people were feeding him lines remotely, and this would also sometimes pick up police radio as well. And one of my favourite stories about this film, and it's on the IMDb trivia and Wikipedia, is that Marlon Brando stopped in the middle of a take and repeated what was being said on the police radio and just said, "There's been a robbery at Woolworths." Because they were shooting in Australia, and I guess Woolworths was a thing in Australia as well. But
that's amazing.
That's the weirdest bit of trivia on this film. Maybe. But there's been a robbery at Woolworths.
I wonder how long it took him to sort of realise that I didn't relate to the film at all.
Yeah.
Wait a minute, what have I just said?
How long it took everyone else to realise that wasn't in the script.
Yeah. They just went along with it for a while.
Okay. So what about this robbery?
Yeah. Where's this Woolworths you're on about?
But like, if you watch him when he's doing it in his film, you can sometimes see him like looking up weirdly to the top right of the camera where perhaps there's a big cue card, or sometimes just stopping in the middle of a line and kind of going. Well, you can tell he's having it fed into his ear. It's just it's dreadful. He obviously didn't care. But yeah, the idea here is that all the beast men have microchips in the back of their necks, and he has this thing around his neck where if he pushes a button, it gives them all electric shocks, and he can shock them into submission. So that's how he's ruling over these sort of primitive beast men on this island. They're not all completely beast-like. There are 4 of his children, he calls them, who are not completely beast-like. So there's Firuza Balk, who is just a normal, quite attractive woman. Then it sort of goes downhill with like some guy with like cat ears, and then there's a guy that's got like dreadlocks and like whiskers. It's just a sort of a motley crew of sort of hybrids, half-breeds. And it's the idea, which is the same in the book, is that initially he'll try and fuse animals with human DNA, and if it works they get to stay in the house, and if it goes bad he kicks them out and they go and live in the shanty town where they become more beast than man, and that's what creates the rebellion and the uprising which you do see. Oh, and of course, you can never forget the character here, which was not in the book or any other adaptation of the film, but what I can only describe as the walking penis that accompanies Dr. Moreau everywhere. In the book there is a description of like a small sloth-like creature, a pink sloth-like creature. I can only assume this is that. Just tiny little pink dick, walking dick.
Really weird head. I don't know how to describe him.
Yeah, it's just like a thumb.
Yeah.
Or just like a perfectly smooth penis. But only like 2 foot high, which is quite big for a penis, I suppose. I looked him up on IMDb and he only had one other real credit, which is a movie that I've seen on many a shelf, but I've never not got around to watching. It's called Rat Man, where he plays a small anthropomorphic rat. So I guess that's why he got this gig.
Typecast.
Yeah, but I always remember Rat Man for the tagline, which was the critter from the shitter, which is what they should have called it, really. Yeah. If anyone listening has seen Rat Man, let me know if it's any good, if I should check it out, because it was quite a poster, I'll tell you that. Douglas here is just, I don't think he's reading from the script. I just think he's being legit here. He just looks at these like 4 children. Look at these people! And then he looks at the little like pink maggot man and goes, look at him! I think this is just his genuine reaction to the characters here. They have a bit of a Bible quote off where they're just constantly quoting pieces of the Bible back to each other, which supports their respective viewpoints, which I think Marlon Brando is probably quite into. There's quite a famous scene here, which is much parodied, where Marlon Brando is playing the piano, and on top of his piano, the little pink man is playing a much smaller piano, and they're doing a sort of a duet. Which is bizarre again. I just wrote just a sequence of mumble-logs, not monologues, mumble-logs. Brando just Marlon Brando dressed in curtains, mumbling to a small dick man is for most of his scenes in this film.
Incomprehensive Pope.
Incomprehensive Pope, yeah.
Incomprehensible Pope.
Just utter gibberish. I think everyone's regretting getting Marlon Brando for this film at this point. He's really not contributing much, apart from sort of looking quite serious at times. And there's this whole subplot, which is quite big in the book, of they find a rabbit in the jungle which has been killed and partially eaten, obviously by one of the beast men. And one of the laws that they go on about is that you're not meant to eat flesh or fish. You're also not meant to suck up water with your mouth. So we saw the leopard man doing that, so probably it's the leopard man that killed the rabbit as well. And leopard man, I think he's called Lo Mai, is his full name. He's given a sort of a trial. Pretty quick, really. He just says, "You've eaten flesh," and then one of his children shoots him in the head with a bolt. And that's it. And then they burn him, and it's only from burning him that one of the other characters, who was known as the hyena swine in the books and in this, I guess, as well, he discovers that there is a chip in the back of the neck from looking at the bones in the crematorium. So he's able to rip his own little microchip out of the back of his neck as well, and that's how he discovers that he's been controlled all along by shocking microchip in the back of his neck. There's a scene where they're sort of in a clearing and the beasts are lining up to get their injections from Montgomery. There's this weird sort of pig women prostitute characters that are like fawning over him, which is never really expanded upon, thankfully. One of the things I wish I could unsee, the little pink man completely nude. I don't know why. It just looks like, it looks like a penis.
As if he wasn't disturbing enough already.
It looks like a perfectly smooth, shiny, ultra shiny penis with a face on it. Wicked Willy. I don't know why he needed to be naked. I couldn't be done with this scene soon enough. Douglas noticed that the hyena's gone a bit rogue. He's sort of over by the trees there, trying not to come out. And then Montgomery realises that the hyena has removed his chip and he's on the loose. Famous scene here with Marlon Brando wearing a bucket on his head. This was not scripted. This was not costumed. This was a bucket in the room, and he put it on his head because he thought it would be good for the character.
And they carried on.
Yeah. Because what are you going to tell Marlon Brando that he's wrong?
Yeah.
No, you can't do that. So he said, "You know what my character would wear? A bucket on his head." So that's what they did. But also it allows Aisa to scoop ice in the top of it to cool him down because he's an incredibly fat white man in the jungle. And this is not acting. Marlon Brando was physically melting during the shoot of this. Also, so were the people in like several pounds of latex, Yeah. But Aisa is kind of distraught because she's reverting. She's got like pointed teeth. She's starting to turn into a cat again. The beasts sneak in to the house in the night. Moreau confronts them, sort of wants to, tries to be compassionate, tries to find out what's wrong with them, but then ultimately gets the button and tries to shock them and realises that the shock doesn't work anymore. And they tear him to shreds in a hammock, rip his guts out, and that's the end of Dr. Moreau. Marlon Brando. No, not many scenes in this film. Made quite an impact, quite a memorable performance while he lasted. It's become clear that the serum that stops the beast reverting is sort of all gone. Montgomery weirdly kind of takes on the Moreau character from this point. He dresses in the same clothes and puts the weird white makeup on and does, I don't know if he's doing Marlon Brando impression or if they've dubbed Marlon Brando over him with this weird kind of voice again. He goes down to the sort of weird basement where all the beasts hang out and hands out like loads of drugs. It kind of quickly turns into a bit of a rave, like an orgy. There's loads of like pig women like fucking each other at his feet and stuff like that. It gets a bit weird. Until the hyena and his crew bust in and shoot Montgomery. So Val Kilmer's also killed as well. The beasts just all run amok. He goes mad here, like they've somehow got their hands on AK-47s and are like just shooting the stuff down. Aisa is fully turning into a cat. I think she ends up getting hung.
Chaos ensues without a leader.
Yeah. Aisa is hung by the neck. You see her in silhouette, so she's dead. Lots of shooting and things exploding, I've written, because that's the case. Although I'll give them credit, usually in like these jungle things, like you see like wooden jungle huts exploding and you think, what the fuck? At least in this, they had lots of close-ups of drums of gasoline being perforated. So you think, oh, that's why the jungle huts are exploding. That's fine then, All the beasts turn on the hyena. I'm not really sure why. And indeed, as the character is dying, he's just going, why? Why? I thought the same thing. I'm not sure what's happening here. But eventually, Douglas is able to get on a raft and sail away. We get this sort of very, very last minute sort of morality ending where Ron Perlman's character actually survives the entire time and says, we don't want anyone else coming here. You've done enough. Yeah. And then Douglas is like, yes, it's a problem with mankind. Sometimes I wonder, are you the beasts or are we the beasts? I'm not so sure. And it's just like cheesy montage of like riots and people having fights and war and stuff like that.
Comparing it to like kind of real life.
I guess this was part of the satire that Wells was going for when it was written, but like not quite as clumsy as that.
No.
Who are the real animals? I'm going to think about that on my journey home. So there we go. He sails off on his makeshift raft, and that's the end. The Island of Dr Moreau. What were your overall thoughts on this one, Mark?
I enjoyed parts of it.
Yeah.
I thought there were some interesting performances. I can definitely tell that they didn't stick to the script.
No. Shambles.
When you mentioned that it was a lot of ad-libbed dialogue and sort of not surprised.
No.
But yeah, it was some interesting themes, but it's not the best adaptation ever.
No, it's messy.
It's very messy. The story isn't very coherent, doesn't flow very well.
And really a much better film than this is a documentary called Lost Souls, which is the making of the Island of Dr Moreau. It's a feature-length documentary. I'd recommend anyone go and check that out if you're interested in what we're talking about here. It goes into all the sort of behind-the-scenes stuff, which is much more fascinating on this film than anything that happens on camera. Richard Stanley was developing this film for 4 years because he loved the book so much, and he was fired after 3 days of shooting. Mainly because he was clashing with executives. He was massively clashing with Val Kilmer, as was everyone. And yeah, they just didn't like his sort of attitude, I guess. So they fired him, but they let him retain his full fee as long as he kept quiet and didn't interfere. They arranged for a taxi to take him to the airport so he could leave Australia, but he did not leave Australia. He ended up wandering about the sort of coast of Australia and like staying in a hut somewhere himself, sort of living out the story of the Isle of Dr Moreau. He was like Douglas or Prendick.
He's probably so distraught of having put 4 years into this.
Yeah, he was like seriously depressed, so he didn't want to leave. So he just wandered around the coast of Australia for a couple of months, yeah, because it was six months, this shoot. That is insane for this kind of location shooting. And the funniest story is that he bumped into some of the people who were involved in the production, and they agreed to sneak him in to the makeup department, and he got made up to be one of the Beast Men, and he's actually in the film as an extra, but nobody knew it was him. So he was able to effectively spy on the production of the movie that he wrote and should have directed, but he was disguised as a dog man, which is brilliant.
I put 4 years into this and I'm an extra in it, so that was it.
And then he sort of turned up at the rap party and everyone was a bit embarrassed about what happened. Bruce Willis was originally meant to play the Douglas character, but he dropped out because he was getting a divorce. Val Kilmer dropped in to be Douglas, also got a divorce, so he asked for a 40% reduction in screen time. I assume he didn't ask for any reduction in his fee. So that's why Val Kilmer ended up playing Montgomery. He should have played Douglas. That was the original idea.
Okay.
And then they got someone called Rob Morrow to play Douglas, who lasted also 3 days on set before he begged to be sacked and sent home.
The producers have something about 3 days.
At which point,
testing time.
Yeah, Thewlis was brought in to play Douglas. One of my other favourite stories about the production here is that there was one day where all of the extras were made up in full beast costume in the sweltering Australian heat, and they were waiting around for 6 hours because Marlon Brando didn't want to come out of his trailer before Val Kilmer, and Val Kilmer didn't want to come out of his trailer before Marlon Brando.
So it's a kind of stalemate situation.
Stalemate of massive egos that didn't want to come out of their trailer.
That's ridiculous.
It has a good summation of the film, I think, and its problems, just massive egos. And this John Frankenheimer guy that took over, apparently he wasn't very popular. He was quite old school and strict, whereas Richard Stanley's quite a gentle, poetic type. He'd done a few sort of sci-fi and horror films before this, and he was sort of quite well respected, and a lot of people didn't want to carry on after he'd gone, but they were all contractually obligated, which is why it looks like no one cares, because they don't. They just want to get out of there. But they were there for 6 fucking months. It's unbelievable. And I'm not sure if it was John Frankenheimer or another director, but there was a quote about Val Kilmer once where a director said, "I could be making the story of Val Kilmer's life and I still wouldn't hire that asshole." And yeah, just Val Kilmer, he got a lot of the flack on this, just apparently just a real arse. He learned his lines, Marlon Brando didn't, but he just refused to say them anyway, to be a dick. Was just like bullying people, and he just come off of Batman Forever, I guess, whatever Batman film he did, and he thought he was like a big shot, which maybe he was, but he's not a very good actor, and he didn't give a very good performance in this because he was just looked like he was fucked all the time. I don't think anyone really gave a good performance other than David Thewlis was quite good.
David Thewlis was alright. Yeah.
He's too good for this film, probably.
Yeah, I thought I did think he was miscast.
Yeah,
is anyone cast properly? Really,
he's not really a hero protagonist type, is he? He's more of a sidekick or exposition scientist guy, maybe.
Most people were miscast in this film.
Yeah, weird that Ron Perlman was in this as well. I guess he wasn't. And
what's the woman's name?
Fairuza Balk.
So I think the only other film I've seen her in is American History X.
So she was in. That was 2 years after this as well. Yeah. In the book, there aren't any female characters at all, so I thought that was probably a good change to make, to have at least some attempt at a female character, even if she was a cat woman.
Yeah.
Not Catwoman. A Catwoman.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's no wonder that you got the absolute mess on screen when you learn about the backstory. So I would recommend everyone watch Lost Soul once they've watched The Island of Dr Moreau, if you have to watch The Island of Dr Moreau. Of course, I would recommend more so that you read the novel, because it is amazing and fascinating.
You said you grew up with this film and had it on VHS. Did you enjoy it when you were younger?
Yeah, I thought the monsters looked brilliant, and they still do, to be fair. I didn't know who Marlon Brando was. I didn't know who Val Kilmer was. Well, maybe I knew who Val Kilmer was, but when I was a kid and I saw this film, I just saw these like badass like pig men and leopard men, and I thought they were cool as shit. I guess I still like it in that respect.
Yeah,
but there's just no good performances. It's a special effects movie. That's it, really.
Yeah.
You know.
But at that age, that's all you really care about. Anyway,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So this film was my first exposure to H.G. Wells. So it took me a long time to actually read anything by H.G. Wells, but The Island of Dr Moreau. Check it out if you've read the book and if you're interested in an absolute train wreck of a movie, and then watch the Lost Soul documentary, because that's way more interesting, way more fascinating. And Richard Stanley, the director, do you know what his next film is going to be?
No.
He is going to adapt The Colour Out of Space, which is a H.P. Lovecraft story, and Nicolas Cage is going to star.
Wow. Okay.
So that's exciting. That's very exciting.
That sounds like another episode.
Nicolas Cage in an H.P. Lovecraft adaptation. That's I can't wait for that.
Yeah.
So look forward to that. But Island Dr Moreau, what a piece of shit, but good effects, good backstory. So check it out. Okay, so the next film that we're going to talk about is The Time Machine, which was from 2002. Adapted from H.G. Wells' very first novel that was published, I think 1895, something like that. Very famous novel, very influential novel, and it had been adapted a couple of times before this, most notably in 1960, which is a great film starring Rod Serling, which is a lot of people remember fondly, but by 2002, I guess they thought they'd give it another go with the advancement, or somewhat of an advancement in technology. So this is what we get. We get The Time Machine here, starring Guy Pearce and Samantha Mumba, directed by Simon Wells, the great-grandson of H.G. Wells.
Oh, I didn't actually know that.
Yeah. So that surely qualifies him to adapt The Time Machine. Guy Pearce is the sort of nerdy, typical professor. Professor Alex. Doesn't quite fit as a name. It is starting off in 1899, so... he's like an inventor as well. He's invented the electric toothbrush in 1899. He's corresponding with an Einstein in Germany, a young-ish Albert Einstein, I suppose. There's all this like wacky historical context, like Einstein's around. Oh, there's a car, and it's like a big deal. Someone's got a car in the street, and it's like, oh my God, you've got a car. It's like, yes, that's right. I come and drive up and down here every night. Do you want to go? How does it work? You know, it's all that sort of typical stuff, just to give you an idea of where we are. But like you say, they do shoehorn in a scenario here where he proposes to his girlfriend and then gets mugged, and there's a quarrel about the ring, and she gets shot and killed. So the idea, I guess it's a good idea in the sense that it drives him to really achieve time travel. Because in the book, he's just a scientist that wants to be like famous and discover time travel because that's cool. But at least in this film, I think it's maybe not such a bad idea to give him that sort of extra motivation of like, well, maybe I can rewind time and we can stop this happening.
I thought we were going to have this kind of Groundhog Day scenario where he keeps going back and she keeps dying in various ways, but luckily that didn't happen.
Well, I was hoping that wouldn't be the case. Yeah. That doesn't happen in the book. And I didn't want to spend the whole time in Victorian New York. You know. Yeah, he tries it at least one more time, doesn't he? And
she gets
run over anyways.
Yeah.
So there's an early indication that, okay, you're not going to be able to stop this from happening. He's gone a bit mad in the meantime and come up with the formulas. And then, you have the reveal of the time machine itself, which according to IMDb trivia was the biggest and most expensive prop ever at the time of filming.
It was fairly impressive. It was quite
definition of what is a prop and what is a set, I think it's maybe borderline there. Once it becomes massive, is it not a part of the set?
It's not a prop if it weighs that much. Surely.
If you sit in it.
Yeah.
It's a vehicle. Yeah, it looked amazing. There was loads of like glass. It looked like a lens from a lighthouse or something like that. There was like glass at the front, glass at the back. A slight improvement on the look in the 1960 film. More glass, certainly. Oh, there is actually a cameo. He pops into a florist on the way home, and the guy serving him was actually in the 1960 version. I don't know how old he must be, because in the 1960 version he must have been about 40. So yeah, this is a pretty old guy here, gets a little cameo in. Guy Pearce, Professor Alex here decides, well, I'm just going to go forward in time then, fuck it. And we get this really cool montage, which is something that they had in the 1960 version as well, and they even keep the mannequin in this one where you see the the fashion changing on the mannequin as he's going forward in time. So it'll be
Yeah.
like short skirt, long skirt, short skirt,
Yeah.
hat, no hat, hat. And in the 1960 version, there is a sort of bombs coming down, planes going over to simulate, the world wars happening and stuff. But this one's a bit more over the top.
It's ridiculous.
It sort of starts off quite modest, like mannequin in the shop window changing fashion. Weeds are sort of climbing up the side of the building. The building gets knocked down. The building gets put back up again. And then we just get this...
You get like skyscrapers coming up.
It was just an insane zoom out.
Yeah.
So it starts to zoom out from like Guy Pearce's head. And then we end up on the other side of the moon by the end of it. So as you're zooming out, you're like, oh, there are planes going over. Okay, so we're at least in like, the mid 20th century. Oh, there's a space shuttle. Okay, we're in the 60s now. Oh shit, we're on the moon. Like, okay, what year is this then? Because we're not on the moon yet. Like, there's a lunar colony. We're not sure when this is meant to be. But he eventually stops it in 2030. So 11 years from now, we will have colonized the moon.
Yeah.
And it was some sort of terrifying cyclist utopia. I don't know if this is an in-joke from like, I don't know, someone that didn't like cyclists. But
we better get working on this. We've only got 11 years.
I mean, there are some good cycle paths around, but not like this.
Yeah.
I noticed everyone wearing like these high collar sort of grey jackets. I thought it looked a bit like North Korea.
Yeah.
In its aesthetic, that kind of perfectly clean, everyone wearing grey high collars and cycling a lot. This is where we're heading, guys. 11 years. He pops into the library, introduced to this character called Vox, played by Orlando Jones. This is a sort of a holographic, like Wikipedia. He's like the physical manifestation of Wikipedia. He pops up and he can tell you anything. It's quite a weird scene. It gets all meta. So he says, "Tell me about the time machine." He goes, "Certainly, it was written by H.G. Wells." You know, what? but I'm watching an adaptation of a book by H.G. Wells. How can this be possible? There's even a bit where he says, yes, and the time machine was adapted into a musical, and he starts singing like a bit of a musical. It's very odd. And Guy Pearce can't take it anymore. He runs out. He doesn't like this.
It's just driving me insane.
This dystopian future is too much. It's just H.G. Wells the musical. I think maybe a play on the War of the Worlds musical version that there is. He chooses to fast forward only 7 years to 2037 for some reason, just to see what would happen. And unfortunately, in 7 years, it's all gone to shit. The world has been decimated by the moon sort of falling out of the sky and crumbling like Majora's Mask.
Yes, what I was thinking.
What if the moon fell? Well, this is what would happen.
And this doesn't last very long. This is one scene and then that's it.
Yeah, it's very brief.
Yeah.
There's some people on the street saying, yeah, the lunar colonies really screwed up the gravity on that one. Someone like pressed the wrong button and the moon fell to bits and fell on the earth.
Yeah.
Very weird. I actually read that, I don't know if this is true, but I read that the release of this film was delayed by 5 months because they were afraid that the moon colliding with Earth would be too similar to 9/11.
Oh, okay. Not too similar to Majora's Mask that came out like 2 years before.
I think everyone was paranoid in 2001, weren't they? Not to show any skyscrapers being destroyed. He ends up getting kind of like into a struggle with these guys and they kind of like knock him out so that he falls back into his time machine, but he like pushes the lever. And it starts like whizzing forward into the future, but he's like unconscious, so he can't stop it. So we go from 2037 to 802,701 AD, I guess. Like in this time, he's able to sort of go through several ice ages. The grass grows, the grass goes away. The snow comes, the ice covers him. He gets a little bit of like frost on his face while he's unconscious. The rivers dry up, the rivers come back. It's kind of cool, like time lapse effects, I suppose.
The fact that there's any life left on Earth in 800,000 years' time is a bit far-fetched, I think.
Yeah, surprising. Yeah. When he wakes up, he's being tended to by this sort of tribal girl called Mara, who is played by Samantha Mumba. I'd be really surprised if anyone listening knows who Samantha Mumba is. But for reference, she was a one-hit wonder Irish pop star who had one hit in, I guess,
around this time,
2001.
Yeah.
Maybe 2002. Yeah, right before this came out. And I looked in her IMDb, and the only other major film she did after this was a film called Boy Eats Girl, which is not as sexy as it sounds. I think it's a zombie film.
I wonder what she's doing now.
Don't know. If you're listening, Samantha Mumba, get in touch. But at the time, she was very, very low budget, sort of Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera type figure. So that was enough to get you cast in The Time Machine. She's also joined here by her real life brother, playing the younger character here. And so he comes out into the village, and this is what the characters from the book called the Eloi people. So in the book, and certainly in the 1960 film, they're like they're a bit like the people in Zardos. They're like, they've lived in utopia for so long that they've become really like complacent and like numb. Twisted it a little bit here in that it's some sort of post-tribal kind of community where they've almost gone back to being indigenous peoples after technology has sort of risen and fallen. And they do sort of allude that after the moon fell apart, that sort of put a stop to technology rising, which I think is an interesting idea. Would there be at some point, would there be an event so catastrophic that technology would start like rolling backwards? Because we haven't got there yet, but it has happened before. You think of like the technology of Rome and ancient Egypt. That was rolled back when we got to the Dark Ages and nobody had any sort of tools or technology, and then it rolled forward again. So it's an interesting idea that it's going to happen again. Yeah, in the distant future, we won't be super technically or logically advanced because it's got to roll back at some point. You got to get carried away.
We'll get too far and we realise that it's not good.
And that's kind of alluded to when they're sitting on top of the huts and you can still see the broken fragments of the moon suspended in the sky, which I thought was quite cool.
That was cool.
It was like a constant reminder to them to like not get too tech heavy. Stick to the simple, the wind and the seas and the canoes and stuff like that, which is what they sort of do in this cliff top village, the Eloi village. He tells Mara straight up, look, I'm from the past. And she goes, oh. And they all laugh, and she tells them that he's a wandering idiot who's hit his head. Not to take him too seriously. I actually read that Guy Pearce said he took this role because he wanted to be taken less seriously. Which I suspect he maybe said that after the critical reception, not before.
Yeah.
He does stay with Mara and her younger brother. They arrange to go flower picking the next day, so it really is a utopian society. Nothing bad can happen here, right? But no. In the night, Professor Alex and the younger brother wake up from a nightmare where some creatures were chasing them through the jungle, which is a bit of a tease of the Morlock characters. There's some quite cool. I quite enjoyed the ruins of New York that were still in this place, because you got to remember that he hasn't moved. He's still in what was New York. So the Eloi village is still where New York was. So like you've got like Tiffany logo, which like crumbled.
Brooklyn Bridge,
like Empire, and it's all that. I thought that was really cool. Reminded me a bit like Planet of the Apes, where they keep like relics of the old world as a sort of a reminder. They sort of go do a bit of canoeing together. They have a wind farm that they've been running in the country. He finds his time machine again. It's still working absolutely fine, which is good. But then, holy shit, the Morlocks attack. The Morlocks. Now these are some pretty cool characters in the book. Like they're described as ape-like, sloth-like subterranean creatures that come up and snatch the Eloi in the night. And in the 1960 version, they did look like sloths.
Yeah.
With like bad 70s haircuts.
Almost like trolls or something like that.
Yeah, they're a bit like the trolls from Skyrim, weren't they?
Kind of like orcish trolls or something.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of a cool design. Like I thought they were like leathery alien turtle monkeys. Is how best I can describe it. And you get two different kinds. You get the ones that are like the scouts that have like blowpipes. And then you get these fucking massive ones that come out of the sinkholes in the ground who've got long hair.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, but I thought these ones were a dead ringer for Iggy Pop
Yeah.
It's like wizened face, veiny torsos.
Yeah.
And
That's true.
the more the film went on, the more I thought Iggy Pop had sneaky cameo in this.
These trolls have done too many drugs and drunk too much alcohol.
It looked like they had done too many drugs, yeah. But yeah, you're right. Trolls is a good way to describe them, actually. But they are beefy. They are aggressive. So they come up and kind of attack people, and they end up abducting Mara. They suck her back down into the sinkhole, and the rest of the tribe are just like, oh well, happens, never mind. And Guy Pearce is like, you what? You've got to go save them. He's like, no, we don't want to do that. He's like, well, I will then.
He's trying to like burrow through the ground, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
For a bit more advice, he goes back to see to the ruins of old New York, and he finds Vox again, this Wikipedia man again, and he's still there. He's sort of been there for 600,000 years, just knocking about, and he still knows everything and remembers everything, and also knows a little bit about the Morlocks because and Eloy had escaped and made it to the ruins and told him all about where it is, what it is, where they live, So then he descends into the caves, into the Morlock city, and I was reminded a bit of Skyrim here. Like there's some dwarven ruins, lots of steam and cogs and furnaces. I thought this was a pretty cool set as well, actually. Well, it's worth mentioning that the practical effects for this film were also done by Stan Winston. So this is the main link between these films, other than H.G. Wells, is Stan Winston did the effects for both films, and they were both largely practical. Cool. And I did like the Morlock effects. I thought they were quite cool.
Yeah.
Although every now and then they were spliced into CGI when they were like running on all fours, and it lost a little bit of its effect. Professor Alex gets imprisoned, and there's Mara as well, also imprisoned. And then we are introduced to Oscar winner Jeremy Irons, going through clearly a bit of a troubled period here. I don't know if this is around the same time as Dungeons and Dragons film that he did. He is playing a character that is genuinely credited as Uber Morlock, and that's about as cool as it sounds. He looks ridiculous. He looks as ridiculous as Marlon Brando did in The Island of Dr Moreau, and they put a lot more effort into his costume. He looks like an albino goth, like Hellraiser type.
Game of Thrones or something.
Yeah, didn't look good. Obviously, they were trying to get across that he would be like completely pale and albino because he lives underground. But it wasn't really explained why he's intelligent, why he can talk and the other ones can't. He was just their ruler. He had like a weird spine where his spine was sticking out the back, and it was like translucent. That wasn't explained either. He really wasn't in this very long. I don't know what he was thinking. There for a paycheck, I guess. He's got like these sort of magic powers where he's able to make Guy Pearce sort of hallucinate into seeing what could have been if his girlfriend had lived and they'd have had kids. I'm not sure what the purpose of this is, just to be a dick. I got a bit lost here. There was some sort of like attempt at philosophy or like explaining like determinism, like even if you had saved her, you would have died, or she could never have lived the way you wanted her to live. She always had to die, and it was very tenuous kind of attempt at like alternate universe time travel.
Yeah, it didn't really explain it properly.
Spiel.
It was just very convoluted.
Yeah, it was just Jeremy Irons doing quite a good monologue because he is, mostly a good actor, and it sounded impressive, but I didn't understand it. Rescues Samantha Mumba. They sort of escape from the Morlock city. There's lots of ropey CGI of Morlocks like bounding through the tunnels. It looks kind of bad. The time machine self-destructs. Everything explodes, just like the end of Island of Dr Moreau. Everything explodes. I feel like every film we review, everything explodes at the end. So that's it. You can't get back, which is actually quite a departure from the book and all the other adaptations. He does go back. He leaves the Eloy, and sort of they learn a valuable lesson from their time with him, and he goes back to his own time, and he brings that wisdom of the future back with him, and he's able to warn people off against technology and stuff. That's how the book ends, and that's how the other films end, but they chose not to do that here, which I thought was weird. They have a pretty cool scene where there's a bit of a side-by-side of like Alex and Mara walking through the ruins, and his old friend and his housekeeper walking through the house that obviously would have been in the exact same space. So they're like side by side with a split down the middle, showing like the past and the present. And I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a bit of a melancholic ending still, because the people in the past are like, oh, he's gone into the future then. That's that then, Yeah, so he has to stay forever in the LOE village with the Morlocks dead. I suppose that's pretty good. Suggestion is that he's going to shack up with Samantha Mumba only a week after his fiancée was killed. Bear in mind, this might be 600,000 years. To them, it's a week to him.
Yeah.
So that's a bit naughty.
And he tried to go back. Well, he went back in time to save her, and now doesn't really care anymore.
Yeah, he got over that, didn't
Yeah.
he? Yeah. And blew up his time machine so he could never go back.
Yeah.
It was the words of wisdom from Jeremy Irons that we were obviously too simple to understand. So there it is, the time machine from 2002. Now, I haven't seen this before tonight, and I took a bit of a punt assuming that it would be a bad film because it involved Guy Pearce and Samantha Mumba, but I don't think it was that bad. What were your overall thoughts on this one?
I quite liked it. I thought there were some good themes and things, and it was mediocre enough for it to be in this podcast, but I don't think it was dreadful.
No, it was a bit of like a Sunday morning matinee, like with the family.
Yeah.
Or like a Boxing Day. If this came on Boxing Day, you'd be like, oh, cool.
Yeah.
Like time travel and shit,
Yeah, I like the... I'm going to keep calling them trolls. I think they were really cool. I think a lot of the effects were really good, I thought.
Yeah, for the time.
Yeah.
They tended towards practical effects again because of Stan Winston, I think. It's still a bit naff, and I would still say that Guy Pearce is not a very good actor on the whole. He did Memento 2 years before this, which was obviously his career peak.
Yeah, that's a great film. But...
Yeah, but apparently he wanted to be taken less seriously after Memento. So there you go.
Didn't want to keep up with the
Professor Alex.
Yeah,
I don't want to be an acclaimed actor. Who wants that? I'd rather be taken less seriously. I don't know if that's an exact quote, but if it is, that's hilarious. An actor saying I want to be taken less seriously. So Professor Alex, you got your wish. Thought he was pretty wooden in this. Samantha Mumba did an alright job considering she's a pop star, I suppose. Jeremy Irons does alright with the very little he's given. I suppose it wasn't really an act like the Island of Dr Moreau. It's an effects fantasy sci-fi picture. It's not an actor's film, is it? You're not expecting.
There weren't many lead roles.
No, you're not expecting massive performances in this. You just serviceable performances which can get us from this time to this time to this time and just have a bit of an adventure, and I thought it worked well on that basis. So yeah, kind of disappointingly not that terrible, this film. There we are. That is The Island of Dr Moreau and the Time Machine. If you could send one of these films 600,000 years into the future so that you could never watch them again, and if you could send one to an island where you could enjoy it repeatedly, which would you banish into the distant future, and which would you confine to an island paradise?
And I enjoyed the Time Machine more, so I'd keep that.
I think the Time Machine is obviously a much better made film with people that care about it, but I think I'm going to have to go the other way. I think I have a bit of an attachment to the Island of Dr Moreau, as much for the behind the scenes shenanigans as for what actually ended up on the screen. And I like shit that happens on desert islands.
Yeah,
like I love Lost, and I love stuff like Robinson Crusoe, and anything, or like Lord of the Flies, and anything where people get stranded on a desert island, I think is badass, and it's hard to fuck that up. They tried hard to fuck it up, but I still think it's quite cool, and I think the effects are really cool. The Beast Men, I wanted to see more of them, so yes, I'm going to differ with you on this one. A rare...
That's about only the second time.
A rare divergence,
I think I just I like time travel, so
I like time travel. No, they're both great, and both books are great. So recommendations on these ones, we've mentioned a few of them. I would say the two best H.G Wells adaptations are probably The Time Machine from 1960, really good film, really ahead of its time. The effects in that are actually really good. The Eloy villagers all sort of look like they're in ABBA, which is a bit weird, and the Morlocks sort of look like the ugly bloke from ABBA. It's very ABBA-centric. The Invisible Man, people tend to forget that was H.G Wells as well. Really great adaptation of that, the Universal one from the 30s, starring Claude Rains as the Invisible Man, one of the best ever performances by someone who you never see their face. never ever see his face, and he just like goes for it in his almost Matt Berry like in his voice work.
Yeah.
He just gets furious at people when he's invisible. He's like, "You fool!" and stuff like that. And he's like really good. He puts like loads of work into it. He's a great actor. The Invisible Man, black and white Universal one, is great as well. War of the Worlds. There've been loads of adaptations of those. The Steven Spielberg one is pretty good. Have you seen that one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was that the 2005?
2005-ish. Yeah, that's pretty good. Although again,
I quite enjoyed it. I've not
stick it
seen
in America.
the original film. I should really watch that version. But
yeah, there's been a few, like one in the 50s that was done by the same guy that did The Time Machine. The original Orson Welles like radio broadcast where people thought it was real. Yeah. Hard to believe now, but when it was broadcast in like the 40s, people shit themselves and thought there was actually a Martian invasion. That's worth checking out. I think that's on Spotify and YouTube. Orson Welles, War of the Worlds. I'd recommend that. Same name, Wells. It's in the name. Yeah. I recommend people go out of their way to see those films, as well as Lost Souls, the making of the Island of Dr Moreau. A very fascinating bad movie documentary. So, if you have enjoyed any of these films and you want to let us know what you thought of them, or if you want to just leave us a comment or question about any of the films we've done, you can get in touch on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter at Schlock Tactics. Let us know if there's films you would like us to review that we haven't already. And subscribe as well, obviously you'll be the first to know when we release a new episode. Give us a 5-star rating on iTunes if you wouldn't mind as well. But that has been another episode of Schlock Tactics. My name has been Ash and I've been joined once again by Mark.
thanks for listening.
And we'll catch you again next time. Bye!
Bye.